Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Choi. I'm the MLA for Burnaby South Metrotown and the chair of the Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services, committee of the Legislative Assembly that includes MLAs from government and opposition. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today in the legislative precinct here in Victoria, which is located on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, now known as the Songhees and the Squamish Nations. Before, I also would like to acknowledge that we have one of our member back, a member from Surrey Panorama. Welcome back. Good to have you in person.
Thank you.
Health is most important, so I'm glad we are all recovering and able to join us today. We do have another member from that is from Kootenay Monashi, who have joined us. He's not here this week, but he will be with us next meeting as well. Okay, so the purpose of today's meeting is to consider supplementary funding requests for fiscal year 2025 and 26 from statutory offices, and we're going to begin with in-camera deliberation before hearing from our first statutory office. So could I get a member to move a motion to meet in camera?
Yes, camera.
Okay.
Oh, Brian, yes, sir. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. The The committee is now in public session. The first statutory officer that we'll be hearing from today is Jay Chalk, ombudsperson. You have 25 minutes for your presentation, followed by 30 minutes of questions from the committee. We do have a timer on the screen today to help us stay on schedule. So thanks very much for the whole team for coming today. And I'll now turn it over to you, Jay, if you'd like to introduce your staff and begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the committee, Deputy Chair and Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm joined by Deputy Ombudspersons Stephanie Garrett and David Paradiso, as well as Dave Van Sweeten, Deputy of Corporate Shared Services. You'll see a lot of Dave today as he supports for three others of my colleagues. Together, before I start, I'd like to acknowledge with respect that our office is located on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations, and that the work of my office extends across the province, across the territories of many First Nations throughout British Columbia. And in making that acknowledgement, I want to just reaffirm my personal commitment to reaffirming my commitment to reconciliation and to dedicating our office to making sure that we do our part to ensure that Indigenous people are treated fairly by the public bodies that serve them. As we outlined earlier this month, the role of a BC Ombudsperson is to ensure fairness in public administration across the broader provincial and local public sectors. By assessing the fairness of an act, omission, decision, recommendation, or procedure, we help the public and public bodies resolve problems that arise between them, and through that, we improve future public administration. We do this work independently, impartially, and confidentially. Ours is a relatively small team, but we punch above our weight. We provide oversight to more than 1,000 public bodies in the province, and we've earned the trust of British Columbians, of thousands of them, year after year. Before we get into the details of our budget plan, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the impact of our office over the past year, made possible by this committee's continued support. The front door of our office is our intake and early resolution team, and over the past year, that team has continued to deliver high-quality, person-centered service, even as the complexity of complaints and the needs of complainants have grown. We responded to more than 12,000 incoming phone calls and received more than 7,000 complaints and inquiries. Many of those complaints proceeded to investigation, where our staff closely examined public authorities and their records and often worked with individual public servants to resolve issues, explain decisions, or identify needed improvements. And I'm going to speak more about the changing nature of these investigations when we get to our budget request. In addition to individual complaint investigations, the Ombudsperson Act contemplates systemic investigations commenced on my own motion. And while not all our own motion investigations are in the public domain, one key investigation is. In January of this year, we launched a province-wide investigation into the exclusion of students from K-12 public school classrooms and whether that practice is fair, transparent, and consistent with students' and families' rights and British Columbia law. We've received strong engagement from families, educators, and school districts, and we'll visit a cross-section of schools across the province as this work continues. We also monitored the implementation of over 100 systemic recommendations that had been accepted by government on past investigations. And that included, for example, whether psychiatric facilities comply with their obligations under the Mental Health Act, when and how rural roads are considered public versus private roads, and how the municipal tax sale process can be conducted fairly when a property owner may not be able to protect their own interests due to mental incapacity such as diseases of aging. Monitoring makes sure public bodies are held to account for the promises they make to implement Ombudsperson recommendations. In a very recent example of this, our monitoring report revealed more than $1 million in retroactive payments issued to 251 kinship caregivers who had been wrongly denied disability benefits. Monitoring ensures we're not writing reports destined for a dusty bookshelf. We seek to come up with practical, principled solutions, and if those are accepted, we want to see actual improvements by the public bodies we investigate. In December, the Public Interest Disclosure Act completed its 5-year, 7-phase rollout. Over 320,000 current broader public sector employees across nearly 200 public bodies and hundreds of thousands of former employees all now have statutory rights to disclose wrongdoing in their workplace. Last year, these wrongdoing disclosures to our office increased by 115%, from 74 to 159. Also last year, we released a public report on a public interest disclosure investigation in which we found systemic wrongdoing. That report described how the BC Public Service Agency failed to follow its own hiring policy for a decade, denying at least 64 employees access to career-building roles. We made 4 recommendations to government, all of which were accepted. We continued to build relationships with Indigenous people. We heard from 437 Indigenous complainants, 110 of which proceeded to investigation. It's a marked increase from the past and opens new doors for us in examining the unfairness of public services. We're also receiving more invitations to Indigenous gatherings and events, an honour that reflects growing trust in our office. As mentioned earlier this month, we continued our piloted collaboration with the Nisga'a government, supporting their review of their own administrative fairness legislation passed under their treaty. This pilot will set the stage for future projects with Indigenous governments. We also made strong initial progress on our strategic outreach plan to better reach underserved communities. In Phase 1, we focused first on people with disabilities and those living on low income or experiencing houselessness. We connected with over 24 frontline organizations, none of which had referred people to us before, and all of whom are eager to continue those conversations. All of this reflects the strong return on investment we're able to provide people in BC. We're proud of the work we've done, and with your continued support, we're ready to do more. So I now turn to our 2025-2026 budget submission. We recognize that 2025-26 is a tight fiscal year. That's why we've taken care to ensure our budget submission is lean, strategic, and high impact. Every dollar requested is tied directly to better outcomes for people in British Columbia. Our overall request represents a 15% increase over last year's budget. And on first glance, that may seem high. But when you look at the actual dollars, it is quite modest. The entire increase amounts to approximately $1.9 million in operating and $53,000 in capital funding. For context, this means that this increase would cost just 38 cents per person in British Columbia, a small investment for the significant impact we deliver. This request is composed of 5 key areas. Number 1, wage inflation and the annualization of previously approved positions. 2, changing complaint landscape and complainant profile. 3, risk management and continuous improvement. 4, digital fairness and artificial intelligence. 5, IT modernization and security enhancements. And I'm going to describe each of those in detail now. First, turning to inflation. I'll speak first to the base funding adjustments to our salary budget. This year, we're requesting $309,000 in inflation funding to reflect both wage and non-wage cost increases based on the BC Consumer Price Index of 2.6%. Within that, wage inflation amounts for the largest share at 2%. There are 3 key components to this year's wage inflation request. First, we're seeking funding to cover a 0.4% gap from fiscal 24-25 last year. While this committee in the fall of 2023 approved a 3% inflation adjustment, the actual wage inflation, as determined by the BC Public Service Agency's cost of living increase formula, was 3.4%. So that 0.4% variance is now reflected in this request. Second, we're requesting an additional 0.8% inflation adjustment for this year, fiscal 2025-2026. In fall 2023, this committee approved a 2% increase based on projections at that time for 2025-2026. However, the BC Stats CPI update released in February 2025 shows the actual wage inflation is 2.8%. So the 0.8% difference is part of this year's request. Third, we've included scheduled wage increments for staff progressing through salary bands. These increases reflect years of service and accumulated experience, and this accounts for an additional 1% of our salary budget. As always, we've carefully reviewed our operating needs and absorbed costs where possible, but unfunded wage inflation cannot be covered without compromising service delivery. Our second request addresses a significant shift in the type of complaints coming to our office. Overall, the complaints we're seeing today are more complex, more urgent, and carry a higher degree of risk than those we received in the past. People are coming to us in crisis. They're navigating multiple government systems, often while also facing language barriers, disability, trauma, housing instability, or financial distress. These are high-stakes situations where our role, listening, investigating, and helping people get fair treatment, can make a real difference. Take, for example, a recent complaint we received from Asa, who had applied for urgent income assistance, but she hadn't heard back. She'd run out of food and had called the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction multiple times, asking for an update and to speak with a supervisor. Despite her repeated efforts, she received no response. This wasn't just a delay, it was a crisis. And through our early resolution process, we were able to facilitate communication between ASA and the ministry. Her application was approved and processed the following week, and in the meantime, she received a crisis food voucher. These high-intensity cases are becoming more common. Several times a month, our staff respond to callers in crisis, including people expressing suicidal thoughts. These interactions demand skill, compassion, and time, not just for the caller, but also to give give our staff space to debrief and recover. At the same time, abusive behavior toward our staff is rising, both in person and online, a phenomenon I know you're seeing in your constituency offices and which obviously takes its toll. The issues that the public are bringing to our office have become more complex. As many public bodies improve their internal complaint processes, and we're helping them do that, less complex files are being remedied by those public bodies without needing our intervention. That's a good thing, but it means that those files that do come to us tend to be the most complex, sensitive, and difficult to resolve because they weren't addressed by the public body itself. Our online complaint checker now provides suggested solutions to over 5,000 people each year, many of whom might previously have contacted our office directly. Again, that's a good thing. By helping people resolve simpler problems on their own, we've made the system more efficient. But as a result, the cases that do come to us tend to be higher touch, more complex, and require greater staff time and expertise. So to respond effectively, we're requesting $687,000 in operating funding and $12,000 in capital in 2025-26 to support 6 new positions. Of the 6, 4 are for Ombudsperson Act investigations, 1 early resolution officer, 2 ombudsperson officers, and 1 manager of investigations. And this will allow us to serve over 600 additional people each year, reduce wait times, and ensure we continue to offer timely, trauma-informed service, especially for people in crisis. This funding will also support our ability to collect socioeconomic data from complainants, such as age, newcomer status, disability, or remote rural status, so we can better understand who we're serving, identify trends in fairness issues, and resolve gaps in accessibility. The remaining 2 requested positions in this aspect of our request are ombudsperson officers on the public interest disclosure team. As mentioned earlier, we have reached the final phase of PETA's 7-phase rollout, and the number of public employees covered by whistleblower protections grew last year from 255,000 to nearly 320,000. With that, disclosures to our office over that time have increased by 115%, from 74 to 159. These 2 PETA investigators were always anticipated, but in last year's budget, we had deferred that funding request and hiring while we assessed the workload. And that workload is now materialized, and those 2 deferred positions are urgently needed. Without them, we risk significant delays in investigating disclosures of serious wrongdoing, which could discourage whistleblowers from coming forward and undermine compliance with the Act. We're proud of how our staff continue to show up with professionalism, empathy, and care in these challenging circumstances, but the reality is we can't sustain this without additional resources. The next part of our budget request relates to risk management and continuous improvement. As complaints have become more complex, effective oversight requires stronger internal processes and updated tools on our part. The public sector landscape is rapidly evolving, driven by resource constraints, increased public expectations, and heightened scrutiny. To continue delivering timely and high-quality oversight, we need modern infrastructure that helps us identify risk early, adapt quickly, and continuously improve. Over the past 5 years, much of our internal capacity was focused on supporting the 7-phase implementation of the Public Interest Disclosure Act. Newly hired PETA investigators were first assigned to our Ombudsperson Act complaint investigation teams as part of their onboarding and training before being assigned to the more formal public interest investigations where, for example, investigation interviews are done under oath. This approach not only skilled up staff, it also provided short-term flexibility and extra support for that traditional Ombudsperson Act service, but it was never intended to be a permanent solution for Ombudsperson Act needs. Now that PETA 7-phase rollout is complete and disclosures have increased by 115%, PETA investigators are needed full-time on whistleblower cases, leaving no additional capacity for Ombudsperson Act investigations. In short, what was a temporary subsidy to our Ombudsperson Act capacity is now ended because that implementation of PETA is complete. We now need permanent dedicated resources under the Ombudsperson Act to meet today's operational realities. But in doing so, we want to maximize efficiency and effectiveness. And in 2024, we piloted a continuous improvement initiative that assessed critical internal processes, identifying several high-impact enhancements. These include new tools to measure file complexity, better data collection and reporting practices, strengthened procedures for timely investigations, and culturally responsive protocols for handling Indigenous complaints. However, maintaining and expanding this progress requires dedicated resources, and it can't be sustained off the side of our desk just because the phased public interest disclosure implementation is now complete. To support this, we're requesting $808,000 in operating funding and $10,000 in capital funding to sustain the internal infrastructure. Breaking that number down, this funding includes $711,000 to support a small specialized team with expertise in continuous improvement, fairness-based analysis, operational risk, and service modernization. These are not general support roles, they're purpose-built to strengthen our systems. Those roles are a continuous improvement and organizational efficiency specialist to lead office-wide efforts to modernize service delivery, guide operational policy development, and support processes improvements aligned with our strategic plan. An operational support specialist to assist with particularly complex file work and provide research support on issues that don't require a full systemic investigation but still merit close attention. This role also helps review complaints about our own service, ensuring we learn from deficiencies identified by the public. 2 investigative coordinators, including one focused on serving Indigenous complainants to help bridge the gap between investigation and intake. I should have said that the other way around, the gap between intake and investigation. These positions collect and organize necessary documentation while complaints await assignment, making the work of investigators more efficient and reducing the burden on people who contact us. An administrative resource to improve triaging of the growing volume of correspondence, and reassigning 2 early resolution officers to team lead roles to supervise our frontline intake staff and mentor junior employees. These leads will also help with phone coverage, walk-ins, and triage. As these 2 positions are reassigned from existing positions, we're seeking only a small increment to address salary differential. Without this investment, staff will continue to rely on outdated systems, attempting critical improvements amid growing workloads. This limits our ability to respond proactively to emerging risk, share knowledge effectively across team, and maintain investigation timelines. Significantly, progress made to date through our continuous improvement pilot, such as improvements to our case management system and complexity tracking tools and Indigenous complaint protocols, would stall. Our capacity to learn from feedback about our own services, crucial to maintaining public trust, would also be compromised. Within that envelope, the remaining $67,000 in operating funding is needed to further enhance the accessibility of our services by translating key resources, updating public-facing materials, and complying fully with the Accessible BC Act. The last component of this aspect of our request is for $30,000 in one-time funding for consultations and professional services associated with upcoming legislative reviews. This year, 25-26, a statutory review of the Public Interest Disclosure Act will be conducted by a special committee of this legislature. Emily Blatherwick is on both this committee and that committee, and as the primary investigative body under the Act, our office will be supporting the work of that committee by submitting a comprehensive package including a public service employee survey, analysis of disclosure trends, and proposals for statutory amendments based on 5 years of experience under the Act, and anything else that committee may want from our office. And our goal is to assist them in discharging their important review mandate. And I'm looking forward to my first appearance before that committee next week. The other legislative review involves respectful consultations with Indigenous governments and organizations to discuss potential amendments to the nearly 50-year-old Ombudsperson Act that would align our enabling statute with the spirit of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. These conversations are essential to advancing reconciliation, ensuring our mandate and processes support Indigenous peoples in exercising their rights to fair treatment by public bodies. The fourth request addresses one of the most significant and fast-moving risks in the public sector today, the use of artificial intelligence and algorithmic decision-making in public sector service delivery. We're requesting $176,000 in operating funding and $4,000 in capital funding for a 2-year pilot to begin building internal expertise and oversight capacity in this area. And this is not about getting ready for something happening in the future. AI is already being used by BC public bodies to determine service eligibility, assess risk, and triage decisions. But the pace of implementation is outstripping the development of fairness safeguards. Systems are being adopted without transparent explainability, protocols, consistent oversight, or clear pathways for public recourse. This presents new risks, not just to individuals, but to the overall accountability of public systems. Our proposal is quite modest given the enormity of the change that AI is bringing. We're simply asking for a focused two people to ensure fairness doesn't get left behind. This request would involve these two positions, one a digital fairness leader and a digital fairness investigator. And together those roles would monitor trends in AI use across the public sector, conduct fairness impact assessments on algorithmic systems, respond to requests from public bodies for AI systems fairness advice when developing principles or acquiring third-party systems or developing their own AI systems, investigate complaints from the public that involve AI-generated or influenced decisions that were unfair, develop guidance and training for public authorities, and create public-facing materials to help people understand how decisions are made and how to challenge them. We've already seen demand for this kind of support. The provincial government has approached our office asking for advice on how to implement AI systems fairly, and we've received questions from other public officials. But today we have no dedicated staff with the necessary technical or policy expertise to respond. That gap is only going to widen. We're building this request on the foundation we laid in our 2021 joint report about public sector AI use called Getting Ahead of the Curve, published with the BC Information and Privacy Commissioner and our Yukon counterparts. And that report, some four years ago, urged early action, and since then the need has only grown. The BC government has released a responsible use of AI policy framework, and national bodies like the Institute on Governance have published case studies showing the risks of technical errors, opaque systems, bias, and regulatory non-compliance when AI is introduced without adequate guardrails. We want to prevent these issues before they occur. Embedding fairness avoids costly retrofits and reinforces public trust. Once automated systems are entrenched, especially in high-stakes areas like housing, benefits, or healthcare, unfair impacts are most often borne by those who already face the steepest systemic barriers, are harder to detect, and harder and more expensive to fix. This initiative will complement the proactive work we already do through our public authority consultation and training team, but it will allow us to go further and deeper, providing focused expertise in fairness advice, specifically on digital fairness, transparency, and accountability. This is a timely and strategic investment. It signals that as public services evolve, oversight evolves too, and that fairness remains a non-negotiable value no matter how decisions are made. Our final request is for $288,000 in operating funding and $27,000 in capital funding to modernize our IT systems and strengthen the digital infrastructure shared by 4 independent officers of the Legislature. This funding supports a series of carefully scoped projects to update aging hardware and software, improve hybrid work capacity, and mitigate significant cybersecurity risks. These investments are not just technical, they're foundational to ensuring we continue delivering independent, accessible, and secure oversight. Historically, our office used temporary vacancy savings to fund small upgrades and enhancement in this area, but high staff retention and increasing system demands have made this approach unsustainable. This request reflects our role as the host of corporate shared services, which, as we discussed earlier this month, provides centralized HR, finance, and IT support to the Office of the Ombudsperson, Information and Privacy Commissioner, Police Complaints Commissioner, and Merit Commissioner. Each office contributes proportionally to shared infrastructure upgrade, and this request reflects the ombudsperson's share. This budget ask includes $120,000 for vital security enhancements, like modernizing our remote access systems, which have not been updated in over a decade, improving real-time system monitoring to detect vulnerabilities before they can be exploited, and aligning our tools with provincial security standards. And this funding will help ensure our systems stay protected in a high-risk environment. The ask also includes $108,000 to modernize key parts of our IT infrastructure, and this includes a business analyst to support our case management system, upgrades to an outdated meeting room, and the replacement of aging tools like our document tracker and manual HR processes with modern, efficient systems. And we're also creating a safe testing space, a digital space for new software equipment, so updates don't disrupt frontline services. And if these enhancements aren't funded, we risk running outdated systems with known vulnerabilities. Further, the records we get from government include highly sensitive personal information, solicitor-client privileged information, and cabinet records. Maintaining those records confidentially is critical to ensuring public authorities continue to be confident they can provide us with those sensitive records and that we will keep them safe.
Sorry, time is up, so please wrap it up.
Yep, thank you, will do. We're proud of the work we've accomplished, but we know we can't meet tomorrow's challenges with yesterday's resources, and the investments we're requesting today will help lay the foundation for the future. As I mentioned before, this supplementary request represents less than 40 cents per British Columbian, less than the cost of a Timbit at Tim Hortons. And for that, we'll protect whistleblowers, we'll investigate the most complex and urgent complaints, we'll support fair use of AI, and continue to maintain the confidentiality of our IT systems. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much for that. Any questions from committee members? Recognize the member from Coquitlam-Millarville.
Thank you so much. Sorry. Nice to see you all. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for the work that you do. So I was looking through your FTE requests, and I noticed that you asked for someone to handle early investigation, simpler complaints.
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear you.
Oh, are we not? There we go. Can we hear you now?
Yeah.
There we go. Part of your request is requesting someone to handle early submission of complaints, handle simpler cases.
Yeah.
Is the intention for this person to be paid at a lower wage rate than an investigator?
This would be an addition to a team that already exists called Intake and Early Resolution, and we simply need one more person in that cohort of people. And yes, we classify all our positions in accordance with the Public Service Classification System, and that would join a team of people who are classified at what's called Band 1, and that's a lower classification than our investigators have.
Thank you.
Recognize the member from Skeena.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. So, first of all, during the presentation, you mentioned reducing wait times. I was wondering if you could provide us with what the current wait times are and kind of what benchmark you're looking to be at for those wait times. I have a couple questions, so I don't know if I can just give that one if you can respond to that first.
Sure. So when people contact us, there's really 6 things that can happen with their contact with us. In respect of a number of them, because we triage so heavily, urgent requests are dealt with promptly. But what happens is if we accept a matter for investigation and the matter is not the subject matter of the investigation doesn't relate to life, health, safety, it goes to the back of the triage assessment line, and then it waits in what's called our to be assigned list. And as investigators have capacity because they complete earlier investigations, those ones get assigned. My goal is to have all matters assigned within 3 weeks. But we are not hitting that with respect to those least urgent cases. And so they can sit for months at that level. Once a matter is assigned, how long an investigation takes is a bit of a, how long is a piece of string? It depends. We have cases that take a couple of hours. We have cases that take a couple of years. Some 70%-ish of our investigations are completed within 6 months. And we have benchmarks in our annual report. And specifically, so closed cumulatively, our closures, for example, within 6 months, our objective is 85. We're only currently achieving 74% of those within that period of time. That's good, but it could be better.
Okay. And then when you're talking about, there was a number of different things that were mentioned in the presentation about how your office has found ways to ensure that you're having fewer cases actually coming to your office through, streamlining different things, having different things available to people online so that they can resolve things on their own. So I'm curious, because you're saying that there's fewer cases, but they're becoming more complex. Rather than hiring extra staff, would there not be some merit to looking at just increasing training for existing staff to be able to better handle those more complex cases?
So there aren't fewer cases. What's happening is we're having the same number of cases, but in addition to those number of cases, 5,000 people are accessing Complaint Checker. And so they're actually getting served without our intervention, because they're getting served through our digital tools online. So what's happened is that cases aren't like they used to be. And so for sure, we train our staff. We've been training them quite intensively on, for example, increased focus on trauma-informed, because what we're seeing is a real increase in people who've experienced trauma turning to us. That trauma-informed training really stresses taking more time with people. It's also part of our cultural learning in addressing Indigenous complaints, which is to slow down, take more time. So all of those things add to the time per case, but we're still seeing the same number of cases because public authorities are resolving more cases on their own. The cases that do come to us have high-graded. They become the more complex cases.
Okay. I mean, I find that in of itself concerning if there's more cases overall than ever before. If you're dealing with the same caseload and there's thousands of people that are using the Complaint Checker and having them resolved, I mean, that speaks to a bigger issue, I think, but that's not relevant to the budget submission, I suppose. I'm also curious how many complaints your office has received already that are related specifically to AI. Can you give us some examples of, where that need is currently? Are there specific offices that you're already having to investigate because of this? Like, where is that caseload at right now?
So just to comment on your comment that the fact that there's an increase, that isn't relevant, that I would take issue with that. I would say that it is completely relevant to what we're facing.
It's relevant to this. I'm more concerned about not on your part, but why there is a significantly higher increase in people having complaints through the Office of the Ombudsperson. I mean, that's incredibly concerning.
I think some sort of attribution analysis of that question would be something we'd be really interested in too. We have seen, we watch specific public bodies quite carefully, and we watch the trends. I'm not too concerned about the absolute numbers. I'm more interested in the trends. What we're seeing is definitely a broadening of our profile of complaints, less focused necessarily on the provincial government. When I started, for example, a decade ago, about half our complaints, a little over half our complaints, were about provincial government ministries. That's down to 40% because the increase has come at local government levels, at the health authorities. So we've seen an increase in the broader public sector proportionally. How one attributes that, whether that's increased awareness that we actually have jurisdiction over those areas, that's a possibility. But I think your questions are, that's a really interesting question. It would probably be interesting for, a good political science or public administration exercise to try and identify that. In terms of AI, I'm going to turn it to David in a sec to talk about AI. I mean, and what we're hoping with this initiative is to kind of stay ahead of AI as it develops and encourage public authorities to adopt good AI practices to the degree we can, because the concern is that once public systems adopt these, it becomes pretty expensive to retrofit or get rid of the system if it's, if there's problems with its algorithm, and that's something we've seen. in the United States, for example, where AI has been adopted by public systems, is that afterwards, when those concerns around bias, for example, get identified, it's not easy to fix those if it's encoded in the system, and so one has to start all over again in terms of those. So I will say that it's early days, but we have seen some public bodies and some public bodies being publicly reporting that they're proud of using AI because it has some advantages for them. It might speed up their service. The issue comes what happens when someone's unhappy. David?
We've read the news reports of a municipality in BC, Kelowna, that has been an early adopter of an AI system to streamline the building permit process for developers. We're aware of a number of applications for AI that appear to be suitable for their purposes, like that, perhaps, for example, like weather prediction and wildfire progress predictions. These are tools used in the background for public servants who deliver services, but they're different from the applications that promise to deliver frontline services to the public. So the fact is, I'm not aware of a specific complaint we have received that deals with a public service delivering specifically using AI. In part, that could very well be attributed to the fact that there is no obligation to make people aware that AI is being used. But the fact of the matter is, just like with the Kelowna example, we may not have gotten complaints yet from a developer. It's really just a matter of time. And it is important to be ready for when that time comes. Or better yet, to work with the public service wherever possible to help them avoid problems and to avoid those complaints in the first place.
And I would say that we did spend considerable time off the side of our desk this year trying to support the Ministry of Citizen Services as it tried to develop AI principles for use in the public service. Those were, I think, quite preliminary on their part. There's a lot more to be done as AI systems are adopted.
Sure, and I don't disagree that, this is something that's emerging and I can see where there may be a need, but I think more so where I'm getting to with that is to have two people hired on, with it being a newer thing, would it not make more sense to start with one person, kind of flush out what this role looks like, you know what I mean, see how much workload there actually is, and then potentially look at a second person if or when it becomes necessary, rather than just right off the hop hiring two new people for that position.
I guess my concern is actually the reverse. My concern is that whether that list of things that 1,000, those staff are going to do with 1,000 public bodies is pretty challenging. Obviously, any staff would be a help compared to what we have now, which is zero. But we identified, the kind of tasks that we would expect those staff to do, and we thought 2 was a good place to start. We didn't think that they wouldn't be busy, for sure.
Okay, I just have one more question, sorry. And then my last one was around the meeting room upgrades, I'm guessing because of remote work needs and things like that. I'm curious how many of your staff currently are working remotely and how necessary that still is. Are we seeing some kind of significant, return on investment for having somebody working remotely, or is there a way to kind of be bringing people back into the workplace at this point?
Sure, I'm going to ask Stephanie to talk about that in a second, and then Dave to talk about the meeting room. A number of our staff are eligible to work hybrid, which requires them still to be in the office 2 days a week. And so we have now a model where we have staff that work at home part of the week and work in the office. That's helped us with our square footage, if I can put it that way, and the amount of money that we require from this committee for space. So that's good. But it does make supporting those staff and involving those staff when they're working remotely more challenging, or not. I shouldn't say more challenging, just different than it used to be. And so, for example, when we have our monthly staff meetings or when teams are meeting, they aren't all necessarily in the same place, and we didn't have good audio systems, good video systems in a meeting room to support that. Anyway, Stephanie, you want to talk about the profile?
Yeah, certainly we recognize that in a post-pandemic world, there's kind of no going back in terms of the work setups that staff have. And so We've been really pleased to see actually a workforce that is quite interested in maximizing their efficiency and really knowing where they work best, how they work best. What that's resulted in is we still have a large staff base that operates in the office and a majority of our staff who operate under hybrid arrangements. What that has done for us, as well as our workplace environment scores, are some of the highest among the public service. We also recognize that we've been able to attract and retain a really diverse workforce, in particular looking at gender, race, disability, and other key identifiers that studies have shown where hybrid environments work best for those folks. So what we're doing right now is working from a retention perspective, and from a cost-benefit analysis, the technology enabling that is of more value than what we would get if we sort of mandated one or
Trying to
the
bring
other.
everybody back. No,
Yeah,
that's good,
exactly.
thank you, I appreciate it.
Dave, do you want to just talk to the meeting room? We have a fairly it's embarrassing situation where we have in our meeting rooms where we literally carefully carry one microphone around and try and encourage everyone not to hit the off button, which happens regularly. So it's really not satisfactory.
And that's what some of the request is targeted for in the IT modernization. It's like a talk show walking around with this crazy little disc microphone. And it's tough for the staff that are logging in and working remote, because sometimes they don't hear the question, so we have to repeat it. Sometimes the system, the room, needs help from the IT department to set up, so we've got more inefficiency there. So we're just looking to automate it so it's pain-free for both users and technicians.
Thank you. Just a reminder, we got about 7 minutes left, and recognize the member from Coquitlam-Millarville.
Thank you. So just following up on the AI implementation and whether or not it would be more efficient to hire someone. I noticed in your budget submission that you have proposed for this upcoming year that you would only have 0.5 of an FTE for that first year. Due to staggered hiring, funding for only 0.5 FTE is being requested in 2025, 2026.
So they're not start because we're already into the fiscal year, because our appearance before you isn't at the beginning. So it annualizes to 2 going forward. I think that's the rationale. When it shows up this year, it will be 2 human beings, but it will only be a half lift to the FTE this year.
Thank you. And, sorry, Chair, if I may? Thank you. So looking at salary increases, I noticed that there's been a request to increase by $94,000 the salary of the investigators, but other offices have requested $90,000. And I'm just wondering if there's some rationale.
I think you may be referring to STOB 54, which is my salary, which is tied statutorily to the judicial compensation scheme.
Correct, yeah.
So I think it's just the same. I have no accounting for 90 versus 94. I'll turn it to Dave. I don't know.
Yeah, the increase does tie back to that, and that was actually a subject of a request made last spring that was approved by this committee. So this is now formalizing it into this year, as last year it was a supplemental funding as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a calculation difference between your office and other offices, but we don't know the source of that calculation difference.
We can certainly look into that, and we'll get back to you on that for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, recognizing member from Surrey Panorama.
Hi. I'm just going to skip through some of this to the more important ones, I think. The wage inflation. You're asking 309,000, I think you said, at 2%. Did you ask for some in the original budget, and then this is an additional 2%, so what would the total be?
So how this used to be dealt with was that we waited for it to happen, and then we came to the committee in year. And I think this committee, previous versions of this committee, found that to be a difficult process to be receiving supplementary requests all the way through the year as the wage inflation materialized. So they asked us a year ago to estimate what wage inflation would look like for the upcoming year and then adjust afterwards. And so this does represent the adjustment on a previously estimate, or a previous estimate, but of course, because we're late coming to you for this year, that was back in the fall of 2023, 18 months ago, was an estimate both for 24, 25 and 25, 26. And so we're now recalibrating that, I guess if I can put it that way, to make it more current. So the upside of this process is that everyone does their best effort to try and estimate what inflation is going to be. And so our going into the year number should be better, but it does mean that we're always going to be wrong a little bit, and we're either adjust up, or in the event that we overestimate and the committee approves a too higher number, we would come in and give money back.
So what's the total off of, I guess, 2023 till now? What was the total on that? You know,
So can you ask, sorry, what's the total on,
the wage inflation adjustment?
so 300, is it 309?
Well, 309, but what was the percentage change in that then? From like the original number plus the 2%?
The original number was 2%, and we're topping that up with 0.8, so the
Oh,
new
okay.
number for this year is 2.8.
Here we go. Is that's what you're asking? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good, thank you.
If anybody else has any questions, I'll just get rid of some of the other things here.
I got a couple of questions. For the travel, it looks like there's an increase in line 57 for public servant travel. Can you explain where the increase comes from, please?
Dave will have that.
Going to ask Dave to speak to any impact on travel.
Part of the travel, there's two components to that. One component is inflation. It costs a bit more to travel these days versus past days. And secondly, some of this is for our community engagement that we have on the legislative reform, I think is it? So it's those two components that make up the increase.
Okay. Another is line 75, building occupancy cost. Also, it looks like there's an increase there. Is that also part of the meeting room component, or is there other component as well?
It's a couple of things as well. It's part of the meeting room upgrade, as well as there was an arrangement between the Police Complaint Commissioner's office and the Ombuds office, where some of the Ombuds space was subsidized by the Police Complaint Commissioner due to the fact that he left a lease early to move into new facilities. And that agreement now comes to conclusion in this upcoming fiscal year. So part of the request is to cover that difference.
Sounds good, thank you. We have 2 minutes left if there's last questions. Yes, recognizing member
Take a
from
little
Surrey
bit.
Panorama.
The case tracking that everybody's sharing is a little confusing when you look through it, as it looks like there was a funding approved, I think it was 2020, 2021, something like that, for full implementation in 2024. But now is this supplemental, we're changing it a little bit, or is this all new case tracking that we're switching into?
Yeah, I'll ask Dave to speak that, but it's not systems cost, it's business analyst cost to, utilize the reporting functions that, et cetera, that are available within the system more effectively. So it's a human cost related to having a new system and being able to utilize it better, but I'll ask Dave to speak to that.
Yeah, that's a good explanation, Jay. Once the new system's implemented, it's now fully implemented across the 4 offices. It's like 4 different versions of the same software. Unfortunately, systems can't remain static. They have to get updated. We've got new legislation that comes in for some of the offices, different investigative processes, so we have to make changes to those systems. So part of the request funds a business analyst that covers the work in 3 offices. And there's also another portion of funding that if we have to go back to the vendor and require their assistance to make some changes, it covers that as well. So there's some contracted funds there.
Perfect, yeah.
A good example of that might be, for example, when I was talking about complexity and the work that we're doing in our continuous improvement area. As we started to appreciate that the nature of complaints were changing, we wanted to be able to unpack that and understand what the component parts of that were. And so now we ask our investigators to identify complexity factors. It's really just a tick box, but we had to build that screen in the system in order that we would be able to identify the number of kinds of cases that were falling into various things, and then that allows us to identify the priorities for efficiency changes, et cetera. So.
All good.
Okay, we do have 5 more minutes. If there's other questions, we can do that. If not, we can complete. Okay, recognizing member from Coquitlam-Millarville.
Thank you. So there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of complexity and a lot of change across staffing levels. Can you prioritize this for me? So if there was something that you were going to be like, this is what I would want to keep, and this is what we could realistically lose, what would you pick?
So all of these things are critical, I think, to what we move forward with, and for different reasons, and they affect different things. So in the event that wage inflation isn't funded, we have to cut staff, but because we're under contractual obligations to pay people a certain amount of money. If we don't have enough money for that, we just have to reduce people. If we don't have the funding for IT security, we run risks around cybersecurity issues. So, and certainly with respect to the staffing requests, those requests enable us to meet those needs. So I don't think of them as kind of like, oh, I have a higher ranked one and a lower ranked one. I think these are the challenges that we're facing, and they're certainly all critically important. It's on AI. It's $176,000. If it's not funded, we'll be able to operate next year. But what it'll mean is that AI systems get developed and implemented without our guidance. When public bodies ask us for help, we'll have to say no. And then later, when we investigate and identify problems, we'll either be publicly critical of some public body for adopting a system that we could have stopped them from getting in the first place, or ask them to make modifications in terms of how they implemented in the first place. So I think of that one as kind of a, pay me now or pay me later kind of request. I totally understand that it's easy to put an issue like that off to the future, but I think that would be, I think just it doesn't bode well both for the public in the meantime, who are receiving services, and when they have a complaint, nobody can effectively investigate. Or if we are able somehow to investigate it, we're putting a public body in a very complicated position of getting rid of a way they've adopted and changed their systems, but we found it to be unfair to the public. So I think that one really falls for me into the category of it's good prevention. And it's certainly, a stitch in time saves 9 kind of approach.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that is it. So thank you so much. We will just reset the room before we hear from next offices, and I'd like to thank you for coming in today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for your attention.
We will take 2-minute recess right now. Thank you. Okay, we're all back. Welcome back. Okay, so next we'll hear from David McCoy, Merit Commissioner. You have 20 minutes for your presentation, followed by 25 minutes of questions from the committee. We do have a timer on the screen today to help us stay on schedule. I'll now turn it over to David if you'd like to introduce your staff and begin your presentation. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you again. I just wanted to acknowledge with respect that we're meeting on the territories, the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. Our office respectfully acknowledges that our work extends across the homelands of the Indigenous peoples within what we now call British Columbia. With me today are my Deputy Commissioner, Elizabeth Maurer, and Deputy of Corporate Shared Services, of course, Dave Van Sweden. I thank you for the opportunity to come before the committee today with a supplemental budget request of $97,000 in operating funding for fiscal 25-26. This amount is a combination of inflation and cost to improve our information technology systems and security. Our budget approved budget for this year, as a part of the rolling 3-year budget on which we presented in fall of 2023, was $1.697 million. I'm seeking a supplemental amount of $97,000 in operating, which would bring the total budget to $1.794 million. This represents a 5.72% increase. I'm also seeking $4,000 in capital as a part of the joint IT modernization and security enhancement request. The first part of the operating budget request is to cover inflation in 2 areas, wage and non-wage inflation. We have a small budget and a small team. Because of that, salaries make up a large portion of our costs each year. A few years ago, the office faced a significant turnover of staff after a long period of stability, largely due to retirements. The office is lean, and the staff require a certain depth of experience, and so staffing changes can have a disproportionate impact on service delivery. I've been working diligently to develop and retain expertise for the long term to avoid future loss of institutional knowledge. To that end, we've built a strong, inclusive approach to staff engagement. I'm actively succession planning, and I've put into place a talent pipeline. I'm pleased and relieved to say that we have been a very stable team since I took on my role, and we have plans for how to proceed in the event of changes. I have also put in place a salary administration framework to encourage our team to stay and build their expertise and careers within the office. In a regular year, I ask for salary inflation, knowing that the public service salaries typically rise once a year for excluded management staff. The supplementary funding is requested to address anticipated inflation. Wage inflation estimates are typically driven by collective agreements negotiated by the public sector, and as the BCGEU continues to negotiate a settlement for wages, I'm left to estimate the financial impact for this. So for that, I use the Consumer Price Index issued by BC Stats as of February 2025. It should be noted that the alignment of cost of living wage increases will follow the public sector trend once the guidelines are established. Staff will receive those amounts to address the cost of living increases. Falling behind on being able to offer the staff competitive salaries may force the staff to seek positions elsewhere. This would negatively impact oversight of merit-based appointment processes in the BC Public Service. I would put forward that for such a small team in an independent office, this cost of hiring, onboarding, and growing the expertise of new staff far outweighs the dollar savings of not funding any salary inflation. The amount I'm seeking in wage inflation is $25,000. If you're following along in the materials, some of this cost is captured under the STOBs 50 and 52, and a lesser amount is captured in STOB 85, which is my office's share of the Corporate Shared Service employee inflation funding as well. I've also asked for non-wage inflation of $21,000. This includes small amounts to cover the inflation in areas such as office expenses. It also includes a very small increase in the professional services total, an additional 2.6% inflation of the total contracts amount. Due to the size and the nature of the work of this office, we will always have a need for legal and other specific expertise, which is not cost-effective to purchase, or which is more cost-effective to purchase rather than to fund internally. Rates for professional services often do go up annually, and this year has been no exception. I am, of course, judicious with how I use these funds that are put aside for professional services. I don't think of this money as money that we must spend, but at the same time, neither do I want to be in a position where I cannot access the expertise that is needed if an issue emerges. For example, the volume of staffing reviews varies from year to year, as does the volume of complex issues that require legal advice or opinion. This year, we did in fact use our full allotment for professional services. In the package of materials submitted, I also included a request for $41,000 in operating funding. This amount is the office's portion for a joint request put forward by the 4 independent offices who use the corporate shared services arrangement. The purpose of this funding is to modernize technology and increase security for these 4 independent offices of the Legislature, including my office. $17,000 is our portion of the request for security enhancements, and $24,000 is our portion of the request for IT modernization. Change is often an opportunity to better assess an organization's needs, and that's the case here. The former CIO retired, and a new CIO has been in place for a year. And in that transition, the evaluation of requirements took place that identified needs that had emerged. These include old processes and equipment that no longer meet our needs or cannot function. For example, the review identified several purchases related to increased software licensing or monitoring of the data center to protect the confidential information collected by the 4 offices. Previously, the offices were able to rely on funds remaining at the end of the year to fill IT needs that had emerged. As an example, using up funds that were freed up as a result of any hiring lags. However, year-end funding cannot be counted on reliably nor consistently to fund IT requirements. In addition, many of the requirements that emerged in the recent evaluation need advanced planning, which means the offices need to know that the budget can be allocated to these items. We're taking these needs seriously. The world of cybersecurity is evolving, and increasing tools and software to assist in the defense of this continues to evolve in complexity. In addition, hybrid working is now a regular way to conduct work, and the technology we use has to meet those needs. Lost productivity through delays in establishing a connection is not something that should be occurring, given the other time pressures our resources face. Of particular importance for our office is the funding to support our case management system. This new system is used by all of our staff and contractors. The additional funding will help ensure the system continues to evolve, that the features in the system are configured to meet our ongoing needs of operations. Having our portion of a dedicated business analyst and a test data center will help us avoid disruption, delays, and unintended consequences. Sharing this cost between the 4 offices means that our portion of the cost is small, but the rewards are great. The full cost of these items is shared between the 4 offices, increasing the impact while reducing cost to deliver the value. Now, I recognize that these are challenging times for our economy and that fiscal prudence is expected of all government organizations. To that end, I'm happy to share a couple of steps we've taken and plan to take to exercise fiscal prudence. In the previous fiscal year, a new position was approved by this committee in part to bring a portion of the office's auditing in-house. This allows for both internal and external auditor expertise, while also creating a talent pipeline for any unforeseen absences in the program manager roles. It also allows us to be flexible. If the office needs to audit more, the in-house position can avoid a spike in auditing costs. If suddenly we need to audit fewer appointments, we could handle those internally and reduce our external auditing costs. This new position was filled last year, and implementation of the new model is well underway. We've also begun to train one of our staff to handle some of the dismissal process reviews in-house. This will never fully replace our use of contracted legal experts, in part because the internal resources still needed to support the audit program too. However, over time, this should reduce some of our costs associated with the dismissal process reviews. So, I will stop here and welcome any questions you may have.
Okay, recognizing member from Skeena.
You. I just have a question about the in-house auditor. Do you have a rough idea of how much money that's actually saved? Is that something that is, I don't know if that's going to be a difficult one to average, because I'm sure it changes and varies a bit every year, but I'm just curious how much money that ended up saving roughly.
In last year's budget when we went forward with it. Yeah, half the cost of the FTE. Because what we did is we took money, we had to get a little bit of extra money to fund the position, but only 50% of funding for the position. The other 50% we took from the external auditor budget.
Okay.
Panorama.
Just, how many positions are you funding asking for the increase in for?
So our office is 7.5 FTEs. That includes me.
All right. So what percent wage increase, do you know what that accounts for?
I believe that's is it 2?
2.8.
2.8.
Same as the other one. Okay, thank you.
Okay, recognizing member from Coquitlam-Larville.
Thank you. So I understand that your facilities lease was sundowning in this last year, is that correct? Yeah.
And we re-signed.
And I was hoping that perhaps you could give us an update on the search for a new place, how that negotiation for leasing is going, what's happening there, and any expected budget increases that you think might result.
Well, we did sign on. I'll let Dave talk to this in more detail. Yes?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
The lease expires this October. With the help of Real Property Division at Ministry of Citizen Services, we were able to successfully negotiate a renewal in our lease, which actually brought down the costs a minor amount. So we're not seeking any increases for our leased facilities.
That's very exciting. Thank you. Chair.
Okay. Any other questions? No? I have a question regarding contracted work. I can see that there is anticipated increased spending in contracted help needed. I think you touched on it a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can give us a bit more detail as to what sort of anticipated help that you're anticipating in that regard.
Just if you can just give me a moment, please. Do you want to, can you go into that?
Sure. So one of the pieces that we anticipate spending more time and funds on this year is assessing the some of the just cause dismissals that are related to the COVID-19 government policy. So there was quite a large number of those, about 318. And so as they become eligible, we've been evaluating a percentage of those according to certain criteria. They're not yet all eligible because under the Public Service Act, we can't look at them until all existing processes are complete. So grievances, court cases, human rights tribunal, and so on. So we're anticipating and hoping that in this next year, they will all become eligible. And at that point, we will complete the planned evaluation. And so that work of completing the evaluation and then preparing the report out will require more costs from the folks that we contract with that advise us on those matters. So that's, I think, the biggest piece. It may take longer than this year. So that's, you know, that's an unknown that's sort of out of our hands, but we're planning for it to be completed this year.
Recognizing Deputy Chair.
Sorry, just about the review for the people who were fired with cause during COVID. Are these limited to any specific ministry, or like are these Ministry of Health firings, or were they across the sectors?
So the government policy that required vaccination applied all across government, and then individual organizations, some of them also had their own specific policies. So it could be any ministry. And so we have a framework to decide which of them we're going to look at that gets at the variety of the variations that were in that pool. So did people request accommodations, for example? Were they included or excluded, that kind of thing, and then making sure that, of course, that there's a variety of ministries as well.
Okay, and sorry, I know it's not related to your request specifically, but so will all that information, ministry by ministry, depending on where you do the review, will that be released publicly for us to have a look at after that is done?
There are restrictions in the Public Service Act about what information we provide when we report out on just cause dismissal processes. So typically we don't ever want anyone's termination details to be identifiable. And that's why there's restrictions in the Public Service Act. So we've never released, this person, or there was a dismissal in this ministry or that ministry or that ministry. When we give the feedback to the Public Service Agency, we do specifically say this person in this ministry, and this is the feedback related to this process, so that they can improve their processes. But to protect privacy and confidentiality, we don't release any of that information.
So we do report out the annual report every year, and that's where you'll find the where it'll come out every May.
And you said it was, pardon me, around 300 and something people that were terminated due to, because of COVID-related policy.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, recognizing member from Coquitlam-Millarville.
Thank you. And so just looking at budgetary spending over the last few fiscal cycles, you had a significant amount of underspending on your budget. I think 2018 to 2019, all the way through to the end of 2023. So can you talk me through, you have a budget underspending for a significant amount of time, and now
I can speak to the budget since I came into the role. 2018 was well before I came into the role. The most recent one, we did give money back to Treasury Board because we were able to come in under budget with our new software system. And we had some program changes where we didn't need to use as much money as we thought. And in fact, even this coming up, we'll be returning money to Treasury a little bit this year as well. Dave, can you speak out? You've been in the chair a bit longer.
Sure. Some of the other changes too that Dave will go, oh yeah, that's right, comes up. He mentioned how when he took his position, there was massive retirement. So we had a significant amount of a recruitment lag. That would be 2 years ago now? For that period of time. We also, Dave mentioned the savings we had for the implementation of the case tracker system. That project was initially delayed for the implementation in the Merit Commissioner's office, so there would be a year where we had funding at the ready, but we didn't need it. We needed it in the following year. So there's a series of about 3 or 4 years there where things happened that just created those savings. We don't anticipate any of those going forward.
now certainly, so we're saying staffing slippage from retirements and not being able to immediately fill those positions, and delay in IT implementation. And can you just expand a little bit? Why was the Office of the Merit Commissioner, why was there a delay in implementing the IT case management system?
In my experience, IT delays always seem to come up on projected budgets and whatnot. I think all the offices were impacted because we were before the committee typically in November, and we anticipated the contract to get started sort of April 1st. It took additional time to negotiate that contract. So there was a 4-month delay right off the bat, just finishing the contract and making sure the terms and conditions were acceptable to all 4 offices that we were supporting through that.
All right, thank you.
One more thing, I'm also than Dave Van Sweeten, so we've been here about the same time. But one of the other things that was different after 2018 was that the mandate of the Merit Commissioner was expanded. So in 2018, a new responsibility was added to his plate, which is the dismissal reviews. So that was added to the Public Service Act. So it's not a huge expense, but that is something that had to be developed and then funded. And
Okay, recognize a member from Surrey Panorama.
So I'm actually forward-looking here on you, but do you foresee 7.5 FTE, is that going to increase in future years, or how is the workload, just because you've had that added?
I don't foresee any anticipated staffing increase unless the mandate is expanded. Yeah, through legislation and amendments.
Excellent.
Okay, if there is no other questions, we can end it here. Thank you so much for coming in today, and we will now take a recess and reconvene at 11 a.m. Thank you. Okay, I'll call the meeting back to order and seek a motion to meet in camera for deliberation. I'll get a member to move a motion to in camera. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion carried. The committee is now in camera. Morning. Welcome. Some of you guys want to sit on this side. Okay, welcome. Whenever you're ready, let us know. If you're ready to go? Okay.
I'm ready.
Perfect. So next up, we will be hearing from Prabhu Rajan, Police Complaint Commissioner. You have 25 minutes for your presentation, followed by 30 minutes of question from the committee. And we do have a timer on the screen today to help us stay on schedule. I'll now turn it over to you, Prabhu. And if you'd like to introduce your staff and then begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Chair, Deputy Chair, and members of the committee. I'd like to introduce Andrea Spindler, who is the OPC's Deputy Commissioner, and I think you've already met Mr. Van Sweeten, but Dave Van Sweeten, Deputy Corporate Shared Services. So I wish to start by acknowledging that the work of the Office of the Police Complaint Commissioner takes place across unique and diverse traditional Indigenous territories, and we respect the many territorial keepers of this place we now call British Columbia. I thank the Lekwungen peoples, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt and the First Nations communities, past, present, and future, for their stewardship, care, and leadership on the land on which our main office is located. On behalf of myself and all our staff, we are committed to our own personal journeys to better understand and incorporate Indigenous history and culture into our work as we strive towards true reconciliation. We are living in extraordinary times. Since my last appearance before this committee, much has changed. We've had a provincial election, and Canadians will head to the polls next week. A newly elected Prime Minister will guide the country through an ongoing tariff war with the U.S. We are experiencing severe and global impacts that could not have been anticipated. What hasn't changed is the OPCC's commitment to expanded civilian oversight of municipal policing in this province and the evolution of our role. I believe that effective police oversight is even more important during times of fiscal restraint. Rigorous, independent, and fair civilian oversight leads to police accountability and credibility, which leads to public trust in policing, which leads to safer communities. The OPCC performs its duties in complex and emotionally charged situations. Our office interacts with members of the community and police services at especially vulnerable times in their lives. We must also work within a system that is rooted in colonialism, and we must be alive to and address the harmful effects of systemic racism as we grapple with cases that are often manifestations of complex societal issues like poverty, homelessness, addiction, and mental health crises. And we work in an environment where Indigenous peoples are overrepresented in the justice system, often due to over and under policing, and resulting from historic and ongoing inequality and trauma. Since my appointment 14 months ago, I've met with over 80 organizations, including those representing newcomers to BC, Indigenous groups, mental health service providers, and advocates working to address violence against women and those experiencing homelessness. My office is committed to better understanding and addressing the often challenging relationship between police and marginalized communities. In our supplemental budget request, we are requesting a total budget of $12,231,000 in operating and $137,000 in capital for the 2025-2026 fiscal year. We have carefully considered and reconsidered our request many times. It is not lost on us that we come before you during a time of unprecedented provincial, national, and international uncertainty and a need for fiscal prudence. During these times, our office still must continue the important work we have been mandated to perform, which includes new responsibilities. We are happy to take on the increased mandate provided in the April 24 amendments to the Police Act. I am proud of my staff for the ongoing trust that has been placed on this office. Our office is filled with dedicated professionals who work extremely hard to achieve our statutory obligations and truly believe in the critical work that we do. However, without the resources requested, the OPCC will be unable to effectively carry out the new authorities and responsibilities the Legislature has given us and may result in diminished service to the public. Our budget for the purpose of 25-26 estimates is just under $9 million. However, we have previously received approvals of just under $2 million from this committee in supplementary budget requests. Therefore, our effective budget increase sought is approximately $1.14 million, or essentially a 1/10 increase. This is all set out in the table at page 2 of our main submission. I want to assure you that it is a priority to ensure efficiencies in our process and system. In 2022, we worked with the Public Service Agency on a system-wide organizational effectiveness review. This resulted in streamlining internal steps, particularly during our intake and admissibility stages. We are currently engaged in developing the ability to expedite investigative and disciplinary processes to improve timelines and efficiencies through a fast-track, streamlined process for suitable complaints. We are also engaging in approaches to avoid unnecessary investigations. I believe strongly in resolving appropriate cases where there is an acceptance of responsibility. For example, in a current public hearing involving sexualized misconduct, the parties have made joint submissions to the adjudicator to resolve the case given, among other things, that there are 1, meaningful admissions of misconduct, and 2, acceptance of significant discipline. This approach would avoid a protracted hearing and avoid having the 7 affected women subjected to a difficult and litigious process. I'm also more often discontinuing investigations where objective evidence makes clear that further investigation is not necessary in order to understand what happened. For example, when there is video evidence showing what occurred. These types of resolution approaches will allow us to focus our resources on cases that warrant them. In short, our request today has been made with a foundation of efficiencies and maximization of existing resources. Our request is also being made to address increasing workloads and pressures. Based on our most recent caseload statistics, our 24-25 complaints are 21.6% higher compared to the previous fiscal year. We also anticipate many cases becoming more evidence-heavy given the increased use of body-worn cameras. Both the Vancouver and Delta Police Departments are beginning to use this technology in pilot programs, with more departments likely to follow suit. We anticipate that staff will soon have to routinely comb through hours of video. Also, the numbers of cases from the Surrey Police Service is growing. As you know, the SPS is now the police of jurisdiction in Surrey, taking over from the RCMP. Certainly, MLAs Sturco and Tepper are aware of the sensitivity of this transition in Surrey. Surrey is the fastest growing city in BC, and complaints are up 16.7% due to the increasing number of SPS officers deployed to the front line, which you understand is now at over 475 sworn officers, but with more to come. Also, calls to our intake team between June and December of 2024 were up 94% compared to the previous year. We continue to take calls involving the RCMP because its oversight body, the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission, does not offer an accessible phone option for the public. I'm waiting for them to appoint a new chair to remedy the situation. I'm very excited that we are poised to open an office in downtown Vancouver to deliver in-person service to the public. Most of our cases arise out of the Lower Mainland. Our new systemic investigation program will be based in this office, as will a large portion of our ongoing community engagement efforts. I've spent time in Surrey meeting with community building agencies and with Indigenous-led service providers, and through all my meetings with over 80 organizations, there's been one constant. There is a low level of awareness of the OPCC and our role. This is why we need to further dedicate resources to public outreach. Given all these factors, we believe our supplemental budget ask of you is quite moderate. We have and will continue to take an incremental approach to budget requests for frontline positions to handle our increasing workload. And I will certainly have an update in our fall submission. In terms of costs to implement legislative amendments, we are respectfully requesting $758,000 in operating and $14,000 in capital funding for the current fiscal year to implement changes to our mandate, notably for our systemic investigation function, and to build the necessary organizational capacity to manage our increasing caseload and broad responsibilities. This primarily represents the need for 6 new positions this fiscal year. We have conducted comprehensive research and consultations to help us identify key resource areas to build our systemic mandate, including research and data analytics this year, as well as policy, legal, and communication support next fiscal year. Executive level oversight has also become a priority given our increased caseload and mandate. We have long functioned with 1 deputy commissioner. However, given our increased staffing and mandate, we now require 2 deputy commissioners. Almost all independent offices with similar size and scope to ours operate in a 2-deputy model. As a matter of due diligence, we looked at utilizing existing staff for systemic investigations and other new statutory programs. However, it was clear that this work requires unique skill sets and expertise. And of course, we are mindful of the health and wellness risks for our staff inherent in asking employees who are already at capacity to take on more and different work. As we expand our mandate, we too should our efforts to explain in an easily understood way who we are, what we do, and why what we do is fundamentally important to the public. Our ask for 1 frontline intake support and outreach position in Vancouver this year and for enhanced communication support next fiscal is in line with similar resources in other independent offices. In addition, we have come to understand that in-house human resources are vitally important as we evolve as an organization. As we take on new responsibilities, we need a people and culture specialist to have a seat at the management table and to be involved in strategic decision-making to help us address our unique challenges. While we appreciate our corporate shared services model, our organization has reached a structural turning point where it is critical that a dedicated human resource person be embedded within our office. As well, we seek 2 additional office administrator positions as the demands on a single current administrator is simply not sustainable. These positions are integral to the success of our new authorities and fundamental to improving our work product. Next year, we will likely be asking for additional in-house legal counsel and policy positions to support our new statutory programs and enhance efficiencies. Further, we are keenly aware of the policy work being done by the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General that could again increase my office's oversight obligations, specifically oversight of detention guards employed municipally and within RCMP facilities. Preliminary work indicates there are approximately 350 guards in over 50 lockup facilities across the province. Taking on oversight over this group would not only significantly increase our caseload, but also expand our geographic jurisdiction to the entire province and cause us to manage the inevitable challenges of provincial oversight in an RCMP environment. We are currently not requesting any additional funding for this work as we await the ministry to complete their policy work. In terms of adjudication costs, we are requesting an additional $206,000 in operating and $2,000 in capital as an overall lift to the funding envelope for adjudications and legal proceedings. This includes funding for one adjudicative support person. I want to be clear that this increase is not for OPCC-specific costs, but rather for system costs. My office is essentially responsible for funding the entire system. Adjudicative system costs are on the rise because of our expanded authorities to call a public hearing earlier in the process and appoint retired judges in more situations. While these April 24 legislative amendments create efficiencies in timelines and quality, our adjudicative caseload has increased. Adjudications are conducted at arm's length from my office by a retired judge. Retired judges provide a significant level of public confidence in the independence of decision-making in a process that is, for the most part, police investigating police. In 23 and 24, we oversaw 15 adjudicated reviews. This jumped to 27 adjudicated reviews last fall, largely due to new authorities provided to me by the legislature. Even though separate from my office, we are responsible for all costs associated with proceedings involving retired judges, other than those related to the respondent police officer. These costs are over and above our internal costs, the OPC's internal costs. System costs include remuneration for the retired judges and for their counsel and for public hearing counsel, or we call it public hearing, as well as costs associated with registrar services and hearing venue. The conduct of adjudications is the purview of retired judges, and related costs are subject to variables beyond the OPC's control. We do monitor these system costs closely and seek to find efficiencies where we can. As an example, we have arranged to use space at the Human Rights Tribunal and more recently the Coroner's Court at no cost for adjudications that require a physical location. Should our requests relate to adjudications not be approved, we will likely be forced to return to the committee with a supplemental budget request for additional adjudicative funding later this year. In this context, ours is a modest request. I note that there is a major public hearing scheduled for January. The public hearing related to the death of Miles Gray will involve many parties and is scheduled for 10 weeks of hearing. This case is longer and more complex than most public hearings. We will be monitoring our adjudicative budget closely and will provide an update on system costs during our fall presentation. I also want to foreshadow that I will likely be coming back to the committee in the fall with a funding request to improve decision-making. Over the past year, I have found many decisions made by senior police officials to be lacking, primarily due to faulty legal analyses. Under the Police Act, initial decisions are typically made by senior police officials, who typically do not have legal training but are placed in a legally complex arena. This has frequently led to, in my opinion, legally unsound decisions that I've had to send to retired judges for review. And I may have to more often appoint retired judges as a decision maker earlier in the process to ensure that complex cases are properly analyzed. Also, at this time, retired judges have little to no program support, which causes them significant challenges in drafting decisions. Improving this decision-making process will likely require me to come back to you for additional funds in the fall. In terms of information technology costs, we are requesting, in concert with my colleagues who are part of the corporate shared services model, $177,000 in operating and $16,000 in capital funds. This will allow for the completion of very important work being done to mitigate costs and create efficiencies, with costs shared between the 4 independent offices. Given the highly confidential work of the OPCC, our expanded mandate, and the digital world in which we exchange information, we are seeking a modest funding increase to undertake improvements to our IT security, as well as functionality upgrades. Enhancements are needed to support and upgrade to our remote work environment to support hybrid workers. These systems haven't been addressed in over 10 years. The requested funds would also be used for cybersecurity training for staff, like that conducted within the Legislative Assembly, and for increased software licensing to enhance protection of confidential information collected. In closing, I appear before this committee at a time when governments are dealing with unprecedented levels of uncertainty and grappling with the need for fiscal prudence. Concurrently, the legislature has tasked my office with increased statutory responsibilities, and likely more in the future. I know that our office can take on this larger profile, but can only do so with necessary resources. Therefore, we face doing more at a time when governments, the broader public sector, and many businesses are pulling back. I acknowledge this tension. However, it's my responsibility to emphasize that if the OPC is only provided with a partial or non-funding of the supplemental budget request, we run the serious risk of not being able to keep pace with the increased need for our services, much less undertake the additional responsibilities given to us by the legislature. In real terms, this could mean delays in processing complaints and investigations, reduced service to the public, dissatisfaction in the police complaint process, minimal implementation of our systemic mandate, reductions in outreach and education, and most critically, an adverse impact on the public's confidence in policing. I'm confident that this is not the future anyone in this committee room wants to see. Too much work has been done by past special committees on improving civilian oversight of policing. And I believe that the system is moving in a very positive direction. Respectfully, I worry about negatively impacting public confidence if the OPCC cannot effectively fulfill all our responsibilities or keep pace with rising caseloads, costs, and expectations. The Legislative Assembly has placed its trust in me and the OPCC to not only fulfill its obligations, but to expand them. It is a trust that we intend to honor. I hope the committee sees fit to support our funding request. I'm happy to answer any questions. And if I cannot properly answer your question, I am sure that Ms. Spindler or Mr. Van Sweeten will be able to. I thank you very much for your time and for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Questions from, yes, Deputy Chair.
So what HR services are currently being provided by shared services?
Currently, all our HR services are being provided by corporate shared
And
services.
so what isn't, like what needs are not being met? Why is it necessary to have an HR person brought onto staff?
So the current model, which is shared between 4 offices, it tends to provide, as I understand it, services in a common way. And what we've realized is, given our changing mandate and the fact that we're also in a different office location, and first, my personal need to have somebody at the management table, that'll be unique within this corporate model. And I think the time is, we're at a point now where we're changing as an organization, a bit of a tipping point where we're an office that had 20 employees, I think something like 5 years ago. We now have almost 50. And with these new responsibilities, we're adding unique roles that we have not had in the past. And having somebody who can be there just down the hall in our office to respond to immediate needs and ongoing needs, I think it's come to the point where it's really critical.
So would that person be required to work in your office, or would they be someone who could work remotely, though?
Well, what we have right now, we've moved our approach to how people work. Anybody band 3 and above, like team lead and above, we're expecting to be in the office every day, both here in Victoria and our new office in Vancouver. And we anticipate at least one HR person to be at that band 3 level, to be in the office, and to get, you imagine with every single new recruitment, there's a need to work with hiring managers, et cetera, and to have that person right there and to deal with it, I think, given this constant, almost the flux that we're in, is critically important. So there may be some roles that are hybrid, and that's for the most part our, band 2 and below are in our Victoria office. That is a hybrid model, but band 3 and above, we're expecting people to be in the office. Now, I can explain to you why I think that's important. I feel that one of my main responsibilities as the leader of the office is to develop people's careers and to help them learn and grow. And I believe being in the office, working with your counterparts, but working with your colleagues, working with your managers, working with me, it's important to be in the office. And I can tell you, as a lawyer now going on 30 years, the most learning I ever did was in the hallway with my colleagues and my superiors. So similarly, an HR person would be there to help with ongoing and frankly rapidly moving issues.
Okay, I just have one more question, if that's okay, Chair. So in the circumstances where you brought on a judge to review the decisions by a senior police officer, and how many of those cases were the decisions changed from what the senior police officer had decided?
Great question. I'll start off by saying I try not to I don't keep track of that, to be frank, because I'll start with my role is very specific under the Act. It's where I think that there's an incorrect decision made. I say I want a judge to review it. That's my lane. That's my responsibility. Much like sending something to a public hearing, I don't send something to a public hearing with an expectation of a particular result. That cannot be my role. And I may look at a decision and say, well, it's been legally analyzed incorrectly. I'm not saying what the ultimate result should be. In some cases, maybe I do. I'm saying I look at the evidence. I think there is sufficient evidence to conclude that there's an appearance of misconduct. But anytime you have individual decision makers, you don't know which way it's going to go. I'll start with that. But I think it's something like 9 out of 10 of every decision we send for review is ultimately, the view of the retired judge is similar to mine.
So would one of the solutions to that issue not be more training for senior police officers, though, and understanding that review process instead of having to increase the occurrence of bringing in a senior judge, but actually having those involved in those decision-making processes receive more training from the OPCC instead?
So, fair point, Emily Sturco, but I would say they're not mutually exclusive. What I would say is this: yes, absolutely, more training, and we're planning on that. In fact, Deputy Spindler had a recent conversation with a senior police official to say exactly that we intend on providing more training. I speak to the police chiefs, as does Deputy Spindler and others, constantly. Our training and our advice is constant. It's not a point in time. It is daily. Staff throughout are speaking to senior officials and those involved in the decision-making process in terms of training. I've been intentionally adding more information in my decisions to provide training through my decisions. That being said, and this may come across not in the best way as a lawyer, but there's certain understanding and expertise that you can't necessarily gain through a day training. I think there's certain cases that are legally complex and require a real understanding of the law to deal with certain cases. And retired judges are a part of this process for a reason, because they bring that expertise to the table, right? So, and also there are certain cases that frankly warrant that separation from a decision being made by a senior police official and having a retired judge do that. There are certain types of cases, any number of them, but that's part of my job, to determine which ones are appropriate, where you need that extra step, that extra removal, and having a retired judge. I'll give you an example. It's been in the media recently. Obviously, murder and missing Indigenous women and girls is a major issue, not just in BC, but across the country, across North America. And in that case, I made the decision to appoint a retired judge to deal with 3 cases involving the nature and extent of police investigation into young women and girls, Indigenous women and girls, the fact that they were missing by missing persons units, and felt it's the type of issue, critically important and frankly complex, that warrants that retired judge to have carriage of those cases. So your point is extremely fair, and certainly we need to do more in training, and I intend on doing it. I can tell you my approach to decision making is, and I've said this to not only police chiefs but police unions, as I did last week, as we saw each other there. is to not lay in the weeds. I don't want to surprise police officials or police officers as to why I'm making a decision. I am very upfront saying, this is a concern. Please, watch out for this issue. Sexualized misconduct, treatment of marginalized communities, analyzing cases in a way that doesn't rely on Ontario law that necessarily is not binding on us here in British Columbia. So I don't hide in the weeds. I try to tell them up front because I don't want them to get things wrong. I don't want to have to write a decision saying that you are incorrect. I'd rather that they know where I'm coming from, but there are certain cases that simply just warrant a retired judge.
Just to follow up, do they have the option of requesting from you that additional help?
They have the ability, are you talking about the retired,
No, the
senior
police
officials?
leaders, yeah, like they can come to you and say, hey, look, this is pretty complex for us.
Sure. I mean, I think that any such requests can be made. I can tell you that senior police officials often have their own counsel as well to assist them. So not saying they're completely lacking in legal assistance, but retired judges were judges for a reason. They are extremely skilled and expertise, but certainly, yes, they can come to us and say, or even suggest it. They can speak to this may be a case that warrants it, but that more likely might come from a police chief or their designate to say, this might be a more appropriate case. And in fact, they can themselves, I believe, appoint a retired judge or go to a list of retired judges. Because what I do typically when we assign a case for investigation and for decision making, we assign it to the police chief or their designate, and they typically choose somebody within their own police department and their professional standards units. But they can also appoint a judge, so they do have that choice. So that option is there for them.
Great.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just have to check with Deputy Splinter that I got it right because she's the real expert.
Okay, recognizing the member from Coquitlam-Larville.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And thank you for the work that you do. Well, that is a very exciting public acknowledgement of the work that politicians do. Appreciate it. So the Police Amendment Act in 2024 created a significant shift in your responsibilities. And there has been changes to the budget and FTE. And so I'm hoping you can speak a little bit more to your FTE rollout for that specific thing, but also how the workload has it met expectation? Has there been things that you didn't expect? What is happening there?
Okay, let me start with maybe your second point first, which is unexpected. It's very hard to connect an increase with a certain action, right? But I can tell you, and I did allude to this in my remarks, the extended and increased outreach efforts we've been making. I mean, I think it's sort of common sense that, as we do this more, as I get out there more, and as I spread the word, and Andrea Spencer spreads the word, and others spread the word even more, there's going to be an uptick in people coming to us, which frankly we should all want because there's a greater awareness. What I've heard is not only a lack of awareness, and I didn't make this point earlier, but frankly a lack of trust in us, and maybe not really knowing who we were. Maybe just thinking that we're just part of the police and such, even though we're separate. We're a civilian oversight body, and I'm not a former police officer or former Crown. So I think as awareness increases and as trust potentially increases in our office, we'll get more cases. So that might be a bit unexpected. It's completely unpredictable. I have no way of guessing, and that's why we'll have to keep coming back to you and telling you about the increase. Now, the Surrey, the increase due to Surrey, I would say is not unexpected. If you kind of maybe compare its growth to the numbers at Vancouver or Abbotsford or Delta, we've been trying to do comparisons and kind of create a formula for maybe the number of complaints per officer, just as a rudimentary kind of analysis. That's not necessarily unexpected in terms of that increase. And in terms of the rollout, we have been trying to be a bit more incremental. And, we did receive approvals last year for a number of positions, and we haven't filled all of those for various reasons. One, we're in the midst of it. 2 other positions we've kind of put on hold, and that's in part because of our adjudicative budget. It comes back to that, because we can use our operations funding and then compensate for any lacking in the adjudication side of things by moving some monies over. So we've been cautious about, maybe filling certain positions because of some shortfall on the adjudicative side of things. So we're being careful. So we're being a bit more cautious, and we also wanted, then the election was called and we hadn't appeared in front of the committee yet, so we wanted to have some certainty in terms of whether we actually do get the funding to fill those positions, because we don't want to be in a position where we fill it and then we don't get the funding. So we are trying to, when I said earlier on that we reconsidered many times what we're doing, we hadn't asked for more, but we realized we should pull back because we want to be a bit more incremental with what we're asking for. So that's sort of been the rollout, step by step, and we'll probably do the same. The funding we're asking for is essentially on the legislative amendment side of things, 6 positions, but it's really only 4.5 because we're going to stagger it. We're going to wait, and we've had to do that frequently, is to maybe delay the filling a position because of trying to make sure that our budget is where it needs to be. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I appreciate my second question was around the Surrey Police Services, and very similar, and so you encompassed the question there. I think I will defer to the chair if there's any other questions elsewhere.
So, could I just offer one comment to your question, if you don't mind? And it's something that when you were talking about what surprised us in terms of our workload, and I think for me, from my perspective in our intake services, that really surprised us, was seeing the 94% increase in the number of phone complaints. That really was traditionally, a lot of our complaints would come online, and they still do come online through our web portal on our website. But the phone, people really are craving to talk to somebody. And they're craving that human connection, and that is what our staff provides. And when I was talking to our intake staff earlier, to better understand, okay, well, tell me about these conversations that you're having. And sometimes they take upwards of, 30 minutes, to talk with someone. And at times, sometimes this is the worst day of their life. On some days, they're dealing with very complex challenges going on in their lives. And by having somebody listen to them, give them information so they don't have to go rooting through a website, and being trauma informed in how we're delivering our services is a real priority for us. So when I saw that we had a 94% increase in the number of phone complaints, that was a surprise to me. And I think that really goes to show the service that we are delivering to the public, and having that accessibility for citizens to call us. And even if it's not about a municipal police officer, we are then referring them to, the CRCC, giving them information about that process. And that's not something we have to do, but it is a service that we are providing to the public. So to your question there, I just thought I would add that just to emphasize that point, because that is a big impact on our intake services in our office, which is also tied to why we're asking for additional funding, especially to staff our Vancouver office with an intake services, and also that intake services is being out there in the community doing outreach as well, so having a dual role for that intake services.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Ask about the funds or whichever for discussion. You have that question still?
Yeah, I can ask that question. So our understanding is that there was approval from the previous year for some staff hiring, but not all the staff were hired. Just wondering if there was any money that was returned from the previous year budget.
I believe it's set out in our materials, but we are, I believe, returning $225,000, which is about 2.4%, which is obviously to me that's a lot. But, if you look at our past 5 years, I think what we aim for is within 5%. Again, and not to harp on this so much, but a lot of the uncertainty comes from our adjudicated budget, as the system costs, where we can't just spend to zero because we have to make sure that we cover those adjudicative costs, which come from judges and then the lawyers. And I'm not being critical of that. That's just the nature of how that works. So happy to go through the years if you wish, but that's how we operate. We don't do it by program. We sort of try to budget to sort of the bottom line, the overall. And I think in the materials it says 3.7%. The most recent update is it's closer to 2.4%, which I believe was 225,000.
Okay. Member from Surrey Panorama.
Yeah, follow up, actually, just a little clarification on that. So there was 5 positions that weren't filled that were paid for?
No, sir. So we filled 2 of them. The third one is about to be filled. It's the Systemic Investigations investigator, and just a note on that one. Maybe another reason for the delay is that we wanted to hire our director of Systemic Investigations first, so that person could then hire the person that would be reporting to her. So that delayed it, and there's 2 other positions that we hope to fill this year, but we just wanted some certainty because we receive approval through a supplementary budget request. It's not firm, although I'd like it to be. But if we do have that confirmation, then absolutely, that's going to be the next step. And again, we had to move. There was a lot of uncertainty last year, as I'm sure you can appreciate. And we had to make sure that we had sufficient funds, again, to repeat, for our adjudicative budget, et cetera.
Were you funded for those positions, though, and was that part of the money that was returned, or was that never funded? You were just asked, you were forecasting that?
No, we were funded. Yeah, we're funded for it, and we didn't end up spending that. Yes.
Okay.
So that might be in part the 225,000 right there.
Okay. Sorry, you talked about 2 administrators, and sorry, I've forgotten off the top of my head here. And
Yeah, administrative coordinator positions.
And
yes.
that's not the HR position.
No.
Okay. And can you expand on their role?
Sure, and I might pass it on to Deputy Spindler to give more information. But as I said earlier, we moved from 20 employees to almost 50 now, and always had one person in that role, and that is a lot for that person to take on. And I need somebody. I mean, if you look at my calendar and Deputy Spindler's calendar, we have to, there's a lot to do, but it is really to support the administrative work of the entire office.
Yeah, so those 2 administrative positions, one of them is for the adjudication side as well. So we're going to be looking to have a dedicated resource to support the adjudicative program. So right now, we don't have a dedicated source administratively for the adjudicative program. And the retired judges are having to rely on, doing a lot of this themselves. And so this is providing support to that system. And then the other administrator is for our office, for broader office support, as we're continuing to grow, different levels in the organization, we need to have the appropriate administrative support to help us with, the administrative tasks, the mailing of progress reports and information that goes up to complainants, things of that nature need to be done by an administrator as opposed to paying someone at a higher salary, an investigative analyst, to be doing more administrative functions.
Okay, just clarify that. So you would have 3 administrators, then you're adding 2 more. You have 1?
Say that again?
Yeah,
Yes. You currently have 1.
One, yes,
You're
that's
adding
right.
2
Yeah,
more.
that's right. That's
Okay. I've got a few more here. So do you, any investigational efficiencies by having cameras more accessible, being able to clear anything any faster and go from there?
No, certainly, one hopes and one expects. But then, the other side of the coin is there's a lot of video, right? And it takes a long time. One of the challenges I know police departments are facing. And certainly we will face that as well. So as I alluded to at the beginning, I'm hopeful that, if a video reveals something that makes clear that either something happened or did not happen, there really doesn't need to be there's another 6 months of investigation. You have that piece of evidence, and that should improve efficiencies. But volume of video evidence will increase as well. So, your guess might be as good as mine in terms of whether that's a net neutral at the end of the day, or in fact there's some efficiencies. Certainly we'll aim for efficiencies through that and discontinuing more cases where appropriate. Do you have this?
Yeah, and I think that's where when you look at body worn camera footage or camera footage at all, that really that helps us land in an area of greater certainty when it comes to the complaints that we receive from the public, because oftentimes there is evidentiary uncertainty. It can be there's no independent witnesses. It can be a he said, or he said, she said. And so the video evidence can really assist us when we look at the provision under the Police Act for discontinuing investigations. So we have a specific provision that gives the commissioner the authority to discontinue investigations if further investigation is neither necessary nor reasonably practicable. And we anticipate that with the rollout, as we're starting to see more body-worn camera footage, that helps in terms of a objective piece of evidence that this office can look at and rely upon to say, do we need to continue with this investigation into this complaint or not? Or it could be used, for example, as a way to streamline as well, to streamline, make those investigations more efficient, and even could be used from a resolution perspective with complainants and that police officer. So I think there are a number of ways that body-worn camera footage can create some efficiencies.
Yeah, which actually reminds me, do you have a benchmark on investigational length that you'd like to have them finished in? I mean, you probably know the biggest complaint coming from police is the length of time these investigations take, so.
That's right.
Yeah, a couple factors. The Act requires the investigation be completed within 6 months. So that's our legislative benchmark, in fact. But just keep in mind, that's a period of time for an investigation. Some are more complex and they get some extensions. But once it goes to a discipline proceeding, for example, there's no legislative limitations in terms of how long that can take. And it goes to, you also have to keep in mind, and you hear about these generalities around length of time, oftentimes we have to wait for the IAO to complete its investigation. We have to wait for the Crown to consider charges. Like in certain cases, there's other factors that we have absolutely no control over. And I can certainly tell you that we look at that 6-month legislative benchmark quite seriously, and we try to make sure that we complete it within that time. Now, can we always do better? Of course, we can always do better. But I can tell you that our staff are at capacity, and I know that the investigators, working at police professional standards units, also work extremely hard. And but that's the intent, is to within 6 months.
Okay, I have a question about the systemic investigation section, but I might take longer. If anybody else has any questions, I'll put that off and maybe we can meet later, otherwise I'll ask you now if anybody
Yeah,
has.
I will open it up for other questions first. Okay, yeah, recognize the member from Quillamillarville.
Thank you. So I noticed that there was a significant decrease in your travel budget across 2023, 2024. And I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about decrease.
Decrease, oh.
A decrease, yeah.
I don't have the number in front of me. I'm not sure exactly how to explain that. But what I will say is I doubt that it'll decrease next year. I think we budget more, and I'll tell you there's a couple of reasons for that. One, with the increased outreach efforts. I can tell you I'm going more frequently. Deputy Spindler is going more frequently. Other staff are going more frequently to the mainland, because we're largely based in Victoria, that there are going to be costs to that. And I think it's critically important that we do that. I don't think we can just be, pull the curtain and to be behind the curtain and not for people not to know us. So I think it's really important for us to be out there. And of course, with the Vancouver office, which to further to Deputy Spindler's point earlier, it's about creating this connection, in-person connection, which is really important. We're going to need to make sure that we don't have two cultures in two different offices. So we'll need our management folks to go, including myself, and to go over and spend time on a regular basis at that office, and to make sure that we have one office culture and not two. So I don't have the number in front of me, but I don't think I can explain it right off the top of the head why there's a decrease, but I expect there to be an increase from that number next year.
Sorry, and just to follow up on that, now you've chosen Vancouver as your satellite office location because, of course, that's where VPD is located, and a significant number of your cases will be brought forward by the public in that location. what's your anticipation around, now that we're developing the Surrey Police Services? Is there an anticipation that in the future you would develop a satellite office there as well?
Oh, wow, that's, I thought, let me just start at 1 before I go for 2. I think, incremental. Couple of points. I just want to go back and explain how we arrived at the Vancouver location, because I think it's important. One, we relied on the expertise of Real Property Division. It's not just us sitting in an office figuring that we have to rely on the experts on that. And there was a whole process to figure out where we might want to locate our office. Obviously, cost was a major issue. Accessibility, critically important for our mainland staff because they're moving from working from home to an office, at least in part, and that's really important. We consulted with our staff. Felt it very important that they are engaged in the process to find out what components of a new office would be really important. We heard them, listened to them, and then we received bids. We heard back, and I can tell you that the most cost-effective, the most accessible locations were in Vancouver, not Surrey. We received a few from Surrey. It was a bit much more expensive, less accessible. Now, to your point about more satellite offices, I'm a big believer in that human connection, and certainly, obviously, it's dependent on the committee at some point. But if we felt that there was a need, especially as Surrey gets to capacity, then maybe that is an option. One thing that I think Deputy Spindler alluded to was our intake staff maybe being out in the community, and when I've been at meetings with various community organizations, we've talked about, hey, maybe we can have our staff come to your office for half a day. There was an organization in Surrey, PICS, where we talked about, well, maybe we can have our intake staff here to meet with your community members once every X number of weeks so that we can meet with people directly and maybe even receive complaints that way. So while maybe not necessarily having another office immediately, because we're moving from 1 to 2 after many years, but starting with that and trying to develop those connections with community.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe this will be the last question. I will, okay. Since you haven't had a question, I'll go to a member from Vancouver, Langara.
Thank you, Chair. So I was looking at the wage inflation calculation, and I couldn't help notice that you have requested 0.89% extra of what was provided.
So, first of all, our explanation for the for our numbers is actually contained, attached to our main submission, which is, there's an appendix there, I believe. But I will pass this on to Mr. Van Sweeten, who is our inflation numbers person.
20% of the increases were 5%. How did you calculate those? So I noticed that there's a discrepancy in wage inflation calculations. So could you please tell me about that?
Building on some of the answers we've heard this morning, the wage inflation that we received for this fiscal year, man, it's hard to keep track in your head some days when you're working at 3 years at once, was 2%.
Yes.
So for the inflation that we're asking for top-up this year is 2.8%. And that's based on the BC Stats February report. And where the explanation gets a little more complicated, which I think is the part you're reading, is the inflation number that is calculated by the Public Service Agency. Basically, 20% of the staff get about 1% more than the average staff, and 80% of the staff get that sort of 2.6%. So when you kind of do the average, it comes out at that 0.8%, and that's how we came up with the 0.8.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we can maybe do a quick question, if you can make it quick. Okay.
It'll be longer, so I think we'll leave it for
follow-up,
and I can deal with it.
Sure, anything about systemic investigations if you wish, but I leave that in the chair's hands.
So we'll end the meeting, and then I think perhaps we can do like a one-on-one follow-up after. Okay, well, thank you so much for that. We will now take recess and reconvene at 1:15. Thank you.